we go. Well, good evening, everybody. How are you? Happy Tuesday, and welcome to another installment of the Good Natured Hour. We're going to try a couple of different things tonight. You'll notice that the furry roommate of choice tonight is Jimmy. That means that the other roommates are locked upstairs. You might hear a little outburst from time to time, but hopefully they will behave themselves. No roses, no glass vase this way. I learned my lesson. But we do have some other things, and we are trying something different tonight. I'm not going to do the typical screen share slideshow. I'm going to try sharing directly from my Google Photos because I saw some really cool things last weekend that I thought you guys might want to get out and see as well. So I know the first few minutes of the program is usually when people are still signing in. So instead of seeing the usual progression of nature photos across the screen, I'm just going to show some nature items. Here's an alligator skull, and here's some cool pine cones that remind me, it's one of the segments of Fantasia. I forget what the episode is called, but I've had these on the mantle for probably close to 20 years, but I just think they're really cool looking. And here's a geode from Iowa, of all places. And what was it? Oh, a hollow bird bone. Birds, we haven't really ever talked a whole lot. I know we've looked at some skulls, but if you find a bone, it's very light, and if you look at the inside and it's completely hollow, you found a bone from a bird. Most birds, not all birds, but most birds' bones are hollow. And I don't know. This was clearly a pretty large bird, but I don't know what kind of bird it was. Kind of thinking now that I'm going back in the memory banks, I want to say this might have been found near water, so maybe it was a waterfowl or, oh boy. Anyway, birds' bones are hollow. Hold on to that little nugget. And we've got some other show and tell things that we will get to after the slideshow. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get things started with Jimmy's help. We're going to tap into, let's see, we're going to do a screen share. Yeah, Jim. Can you hear him purr? He's got a great motor. All right, we're going to share. Where is my... Hold on here. No. He bites when he's happy. All right, where? Oh, you know what? I got to do this. There we go. Okay. Are you guys now looking at flowers? I kind of lost track of where I was with the share because I couldn't see what I was doing because there was a cat in the way. Let me just go back here. Yeah, it looks like we're now looking at flowers. Does everybody agree? All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a slideshow.
No,
Oh, you can't see it?
can't see anything. We see you.
Oh, that's no good. That is not what you want to see. All right, let me shrink.
Lovely.
I'm looking at false meadow rue. I apologize. You guys have to look at me. It's been a long day. All right, let me try this one more time. I'm going to choose this. Okay, now do you see flowers?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to shrink that, and I'm going to turn this into a slideshow up here. All right. Thanks, Susie, for the assist. And
No problem.
all right. So last weekend, I went on a little walk with a friend. We met in Batavia. We met by the skate park. It was my friend Jessie. We walked down towards Red Oak, my old stomping grounds. And I was just, it's a decent day. It wasn't Saturday when it was super warm, but it was Sunday, and it actually, after the downpour, it turned out to be a pretty nice afternoon. And the wildflowers were putting on such a show. So I started taking pictures around Glenwood Park. So local folks, that's the park that is about 2 miles south of Wilson Street in Batavia. It's a King County Forest Preserve. This was the first grouping we saw. We can see it's a lot of false meadow rue. Here's another view. You can see there's a few little trout lilies poking through here at the bottom. This leaf that looks like a fish. We'll get to those. They get their own slide in a minute. Jessie, though, pointed out that as the wind was blowing, and it was still pretty breezy that day, these flowers looked like they were dancing in the breeze, and I thought that was a pretty cool description. They have a very thin, very delicate stem, and so it just takes a little bit of breeze to get both the blossoms and the petals and the leaves quivering. Now, that was just like a 3-second loop. I don't want anybody to get dizzy. Let's move on. So here's the trout lily in its own right. This is a plant that happens to be old enough to bloom. Now, I've heard different figures for when trout lilies are old enough to bloom. Sometimes the number I've most often heard is 7 years, where it'll send up a single leaf and then it'll finally bloom. You can see how it gets the name lily because of the shape of that blossom. Underneath, you can see just barely peeking out there some of the pollen that's inside. It's waiting to be visited by a springtime pollinator. The trout part of the name comes from that shape of the leaf. You can see it's vaguely fish-shaped. And then it's got a mottled appearance to it. Some people even say that by touching the leaf, it's very smooth. It's not slick or slimy, but it's very smooth. And of course, in the springtime, it's often cool, so that too helps it feel like a fish as well. Now we moved on. This looks like the flowers of toothwort. Now, in last week's column, I wrote about hepatica, and I mentioned it's an old way of thinking about plants. It's called the Doctrine of Signatures. It actually dates back to Greek and Roman times, and the thinking then, and it was handed down, it went through various stages of popularity over the years, but the thinking was that our creator, and there were lots of creators depending on if you were Greek or Roman or European, that the plants that we have on this earth have features that resemble different parts of our bodies. And if you can match the shape of the plant to the part of the body that it resembles, then you can use it to fix that particular body part. In the case of hepatica, it is supposed to look like the lobes of our liver, and therefore, and even the name hepatica makes reference to that liver connection. In this case, toothwort, if you look behind the flower, you see the leaves of this plant, and you see they've got some toothed edges. Well, one of the genus names, it's undergone some taxonomic changes recently too. I learned it as dentaria. So dentaria, dental. This was a tooth you would use if you had a plant that you would use if you had a problem with your tooth. Speaking of teeth, I'm getting bit, Jimmy. He's such a cat. Let's move on here. We've got a couple of different angles here on this little plant, this spring beauty. Over at Potawatomi Park, there is a big chunk of the lawn up near 2nd Avenue that is just almost solid spring beauties. We have another large patch of these over at Delnor Woods. You'll see all kinds of early pollinators, especially the ground bees, our Coletes species, coming to these flowers, gathering a little bit of nectar, a little bit of pollen, hauling it back to their burrows, because most of our early spring pollinators are solitary. Here's one more spring breeder. You can see the foliage of this flower looks almost grass-like. So it does oftentimes spread quite widely through a yard, and it makes it look like your grass is flowering. So this one didn't turn out so well. This was a Solomon seal. I must have focused on something other than the plant, but if you can see that blurry, looks kind of like either a bird's foot or a upside down peace sign right there in the middle. That was an early shoot of Solomon seal. Oh, the other furry roommates are getting jealous. They're not part of the party down here. And then here we have our Trillium. This is Trillium recurvatum, which refers to the way the leaves, you can see over on the left, the leaves kind of curve back towards the plant. Trillium is a plant of threes. Tri, first part of the word. Trillium refers to the three petals of the flower, but it also refers to the three sepals, which are the green structures below the petals of the flower, and then the three leaves that are pretty prominent there. It's not bloom yet, but when these buds pop open, you would see a very dark red flower. That name, the plant, even though it grows in the woodlands, it has the common name of prairie trillium, but those dark red flowers are sometimes also called bloody noses, because it's kind of what they look like. And we walked a little bit farther and we saw Virginia waterleaf. Now, I have to tell you, this is how I learned this plant, was by its foliage. And you can see how the darker green leaves have the white, lighter green spots are supposed to look like water on the leaf. Well, this plant does get a nice, almost fuzzy looking light purple flower a little bit later on. I remember walking past that flower and looking at it and going, what in the, what? I've never seen this flower before. What could it be? Because I focused so much on the leaf, I forgot, that a lot of these plants send up flowers too, but this is what we're seeing at this stage in April. You have to wait another few weeks before you see the bloom. So we walked a little bit farther and we saw this bloodroot. This one was actually done blooming. This is a plant named, in fact, you can see there towards the left, you can see where the blossom was and where the seed is forming. This is a plant, bloodroot. It's named for the blood red juice that's inside the plant. Now, if you pluck a leaf off of one of these plants, oftentimes what you see is more of an orangish red fluid inside the plant. But if you were to dig it up, and we don't advise it if you're digging in a park or a forest preserve, you can't do that actually, but if you have some in your yard, maybe you're going to move some around or something, and you touch that root, it is a really dark red and it does look like blood. It's a fluid that was used over the years as makeup or face paint or as a dye. Had lots of uses over time. And we walked a little farther and we saw the plant, one of the plants that was alleged to have given Chicago its name. This is the Wild Leek. You can see we've got this year's foliage and we've got last year's flower, which has gone to seed. Now, leeks are in the onion family. The legend or the folklore, some people say it's the God's honest truth, but the story behind this plant is that as the French voyageurs were coming to this part of the New World, and they were coming across the Great Lakes, they pulled their canoes up on the shores of what is now Lake Michigan, and what is also today known as Chicago, and they exited debarked, started walking towards the native people of that area. And as they walked, they trod upon this plant, the wild leek. Now, if you've ever smelled leeks, it's a pretty pungent and memorable smell. Well, as they walked across these leeks, crushing them with their boots, the smell started to rise up. And as the native people came closer, the Frenchmen could see the natives waving their hands in front of their faces and going, oh, Chicago, Chicago. And the Frenchman asked them, he said, is this where we are? You're saying we are here in Chicago? And they go, oh, Chicago. Well, what they were saying was not, yes, you're in Chicago. They were saying, you Frenchmen, you're stepping on our stinking onion plant. Chicago, stinky onion plant. Well, the French interpreted that as the name of that spot on the Great Lake, and they started referring to it as Chicago, which over time became Chicago. So I think of that plant story every time I see this plant, and I always can't help but pinch just a little bit of the leaf and smell the stinking onion plant myself. Here's another view of the wild leek. It's a broad leaf. It almost looks, if you're familiar with the plant lily of the valley, it almost looks like that. Sometimes people say it looks like young daylilies that are coming up, but it doesn't get very large. I would say these leaves are maybe 6 inches or so across, and they're very thin. And of course, they've got that unmistakable Chicago stink about them. This is another plant, by the way. I said don't dig up the bloodroot in the parks and the preserves. This is another plant that people come in. It's frequently taken. It's poached from our preserves. People use it to cook with. It's also known as ramp in some parts of the country. There's Ramp Fest. People cook with ramp. I mentioned a few weeks ago, I'd gone down to Funk's Grove in McLean County, Illinois. They have a big maple sugaring operation. The Funk family still operates down there. Well, one of the sons of the Funk family is he forages a lot in the woods, and he makes a lot of, he collects a lot of plants that he then figures out how to eat. Well, he made, and I have yet to try it, but I have now triple bagged it. I bought a package of it's powdered leeks and maple sugar, and it's a seasoning. It's a rub you can put on meats. They even said you can try it on popcorn, but it has such a strong Chicago aroma about it that it was packaged in a paper bag that I put in a plastic bag that I've now put in another plastic bag to try and make sure that it doesn't make all my other spices smell Chicago-y. Anyway, these are appearing now. The flower will come later on. Here's some more bloodroot. There is a blossom down at the bottom that's hanging on here. Multi-petaled white blooms on the bloodroot, but this is a plant, because it blooms so early, it is getting towards the end of its bloom cycle for this year. Keep in mind, as we look at these spring wildflowers, their whole mission is to get up out of the ground, get their foliage out, photosynthesize, get their flowers out so that they can get pollinated and set their seeds before the leaves come out on the trees. These are woodland wildflowers, so sunlight is important to them. Once the trees leaf out, which in this area it's usually around Mother's Day, that's going to block a lot of the sunlight hitting the woodland floor. There's still a few plants that will bloom in the woods, but the show in the early spring is really spectacular, and it's due to our leaves not having leafed out on the trees yet. One more bloodroot before we move on to now this is the creek that runs through Glenwood Park, and I thought this was cool. So this was probably 2 hours after the hard rain that we had on Sunday. So it was the creek was raging, it's a great example of how much of our water that hits the ground around here actually ends up in a waterway as opposed to soaking into the ground. But anyway, the water's coursing along. Look at these shelves of dolomite. This is the bedrock in our area, and it forms the bottom of this creek. It leads to some really interesting formations. Once the water gets lower, you can see these shelves. They're kind of like mini bluffs all along the creek. And then this does lead down to the Fox River, where it flows into the river down just a little bit west of here. Not sure what I was going for here. Oh, you know what? There was a Phoebe. I don't know if I can find the Phoebe it's right here, but you know what, it was so far away. What I wanted to show you was that Phoebes are flycatchers, and the flycatcher family is notoriously hard. There's some very, very similar flycatchers, but the Phoebe is one that stands out. Even a mediocre birder like myself can pick it out because it has a habit which we can't see in this video, but it's a gray little bird with a slight crest and a yellowish cast to its breast. When it sits on a branch, it will be almost constantly pumping its tail. There's another somewhat similar but smaller flycatcher called the eastern wood pewee that we should be seeing any time now too. Both of these birds specialize in catching insects on the wing, but the Phoebe pumps its tail and the pewee does not. So just a little identification trick that this video does nothing to help us see. So let's move on. Let's take a look at our next slide, which is more toothwort. So this is a little bit better picture of the leaves. The flowers were a little droopy, probably because of the hard rain, but you can see the tooth-like projections on the cutleaf toothwort, which supposedly can help you if you got a bad toothy. This is one of my favorite plants. If you're looking for a ground cover, a native ground cover, I love wild ginger. This is a plant that's just starting to leaf out now. It keeps this low growth habit. It fills in areas quite nicely. And it does bloom, but it's not at any stretch of the imagination can be called a showy bloom. It's a dark red or maroon, kind of a brownish red actually, flower that is tucked underneath the leaves. And you might be thinking, well, what in the world is going to find it down there? Ants find it down there. In fact, ants are very important for the dispersal of the seeds produced by wild ginger. I've often told the story, and if I've told it to you guys, I apologize because I'm about to tell it again. I have a lot of wild ginger on the north side of my house. Mike, Audrey, you guys are familiar with that. Over the last 25 years or so, it's spread and it's filled in a lot because it doesn't mind shade. It's done really well over there on the north side. Well, a couple of years ago, I happened to notice that I now have wild ginger over on the south side of my house. And the only thing I can think of, I know I didn't transplant anything from one side of the house to the other. The only thing I can think is that those ants that go marching one by one must have gotten a hold of some wild ginger seeds and walked all the way across the front of the house, across the sidewalk, across the driveway, took the seeds down into their ant hole. I never kill the ants around here. I got all kinds of ants out in the yard. They took the seeds into their colony. They ate. This is one of the plants we've talked about in the past. The plant seed contains a little strip of fat, and I believe protein, or no, maybe it's fat and sugar. But anyway, it's an attractant for ants, and so they take the seed with them to their colony. They bring it down. They feed off that little strip of nutrients, and then they cast the seed aside, which is perfect for the seed. It doesn't. None of the embryos that are inside are damaged. It's only on the outside that the ants feed, and the seed is under the ground, and all it needs is a little water, and it starts to grow. So a neat relationship between wild ginger. Actually, a lot of our springtime ephemerals, our woodland wildflowers, have that relationship with ants, because ants are a type of insect that does get moving pretty early in the springtime. Here we've got wild ginger and toothwort sharing some space underneath a big old oak tree. Oh, there's a little trillium over here on the left as well. Another great and nearly unmistakable woodland wildflower, the mayapple. This is another plant that takes several years in order to bloom. As a young plant, it will send up a single stem with a single leaf. I always think these look kind of like patio umbrellas for Barbie. But after a period of years, then that single stem actually splits into two leaves. And then in between those two leaves is where we find the mayapple blossom. That flower, it's a white flower, that turns into the fruit, which looks for all the world like a tiny little Granny Smith apple. Maybe the size of, say quarter to $1/2 circumference. And it is edible if you pick it at the right time. Now, you pick it too soon, you get a bellyache. You pick it too late, you get a bellyache. The way I've most often heard people consuming mayapples is in mayapple jelly. So any of you have ever done that, I'd love to hear about it and learn more about the timing of making it, because I've heard more cautions against doing it than I have actual people who've done it and said, oh yes, it's delicious, you must try it. So anyway, mayapples. Now today, these plants, they actually had folded down much like an umbrella does when the weather is inclement. This morning it was really chilly, but on a warm day, those leaves open up and they grab that sunshine. So here's our skunk cabbage. Remember we talked about skunk cabbage a few weeks ago? It's our earliest blooming native wildflower. Well, now the leaves are starting to unfurl, and they can be quite large. I've got a couple of different shots here. I took this angle because we've got in the foreground here, we've got a big old rock that I have a feeling was deposited there by a glacier many, many years ago. Here's more skunk cabbage. So skunk cabbage, it likes to have its feet wet. This area happens to be an area where there's a lot of seeps. This is still in Glenwood Park, but it is near the bike trail. This area can be soggy even when the rest of the ground is dry. Here's what's become of our skunk cabbage blossom, that spathe and spadix structure that we talked about before. It's done attracting pollinators. It's going to work now the rest of the summer on forming its fruit there in the center, and then each of those sections of that fruit will contain a seed, and that's how we get more skunk cabbage. The other thing I wanted to point out here, there's these other smaller plants coming up. Another indication that we're looking at a very wet area. This is jewelweed, and jewelweed, it also likes to have its feet wet. You can see Jimmy's playing with the microphone. Jewelweed is often recommended as a remedy should you get yourself into some stinging nettles. Jewelweed is it's part of the genus Impatiens. You've probably seen some of the ornamental impatiens that you can buy at garden centers. A lot of people plant impatiens in shady areas in their yards. Well, jewelweed is related to those plants, but it grows taller. It's got some have a yellow blossom. Other jewelweed has a more of an orangish blossom. has a very fleshy stem though, and that fluid that's inside, that liquid that's inside that stem, can be used to help take the sting away if you get yourself into stinging nettles. I've also heard that it can help with the itch of poison ivy, but I've never had any luck with that. Once I've gotten into poison ivy, I guess you have to rub it really hard. Poison ivy, if you react to that plant, it's because you're allergic to the oils in poison ivy, and you'd have to scrub pretty hard with the impatiens to get that oil off your skin. I think there's better remedies for poison ivy than jewelweed, but I know it definitely works on stinging nettles because I've tried it. A little more skunk cabbage, skunk cabbage with a lip balm, so you can get a sense for how big these leaves really are. So here's some wild geranium. We haven't gotten to the point where it's anywhere near blooming yet. This is a flower that we usually see in May. Another name for wild geranium is Cranesbill, because of the way the seed head looks after the flower has bloomed. Well, I guess the flower kind of looks like a crane's bill too. It's got a long projection in it. But the cool thing about these wild geraniums is when they have gone to seed, that cranesbill structure, it ripens and then it pops and it flings its seeds. Jewelweed is another plant that flings its seeds. So lots of popping and flinging to come as these flowers reach their maturity. So this, I don't know what these are. I didn't look them up. I just thought they were really cool. This, we've got a couple different views here of, I'm guessing maybe a type of cup fungus and some moss that's in its reproductive phase. It just looked like, you'd expect to see a little fairy come and take a sip from those cups. You can see everything's still pretty wet. This is about an hour and a half or so after the rain we had. I don't know why that's there. But it's no wonder that I'm always running late for things. When you stop to look at one thing, then your eye catches another and another and another. Down from here, we have, let me get the in focus shot, a jack in the pulpit that was just starting to uncurl from its sheath, coming up out of the ground. Another few days and that'll be sending its 3 leaves up, and then its jack and its pulpit, its spathe and spadix structure, with a lip balm so you get a sense of how big it is, or how small it is actually. Here's some more toothwort. And I think there was a see, this looks like it's turning into a video. I believe there are some honeybees. Yeah, there were 2 honeybees that were out taking advantage. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you dizzy there, but there's one. And I don't know why that keeps asking me. So it was warm enough for the insects to be flying. Cool lichens. I did not sit through the entire lichens Learn from the Experts program a few weeks ago. So those of you who did can look at this. I believe that's fruticose, the style or the structure of that particular lichen, but it was on a hunk of bark that had fallen onto the bike trail, and it looked, I actually thought it was a kale leaf until I picked it up and realized that, nope, it's a lichen. I don't know why that keeps happening. All right, let me see if I can get this to go away for good. I'm sorry about that box. So then I saw this. This is all along the side of the bike trail, little tiny brown discs. And this is one of those cases where I sometimes I refer to my brain as having a dimmer switch, and how it's usually on dim, and then if you crank it very slowly, it starts to brighten up and the light bulb finally comes on. So I was looking at, there was a lot of these little discs. Look at that. And I picked it up and I go, Jess, this looks like a lentil. So in my mind, I'm thinking somebody on a bicycle, maybe somebody with a backpack had bought a dry soup mix that had a lot of lentils in it, and then they crashed or dropped it or it spilled or whatever, and the rain washed it all to the side. But you'll notice there's these little pods. So here's the lip balm, here's a pod. I looked up above where these lentil-like seeds were sitting on the bike trail. More pods here. More pods here. More pods here. You all might recognize this. Your dimmer switches probably work faster than mine. These are redbud seed pods, and those seeds, if we go back and look again, are redbud seeds that have washed out of those pods. So I got kind of curious when I got home that night. I thought, can you substitute redbud seeds for lentils? They are in the same family. They are legumes. Redbuds, however, they don't have the ability to fix nitrogen, which is the star quality that a lot of our legumes have. But people do eat the pods of the redbud. They don't typically do it, though, when they're dry. All the references I found talked about harvesting these pods when they're still green. They look and they have a feel like a pea pod, but they supposedly have a citrusy, a tangy quality to them. I didn't see anything that said that they turn toxic later on, so I might try cooking some of these sometime just to see what happens. They're awfully hard, though. You know how with a lentil you can usually split it open even when it's dry? These were like little rocks, so I don't know. They might not ever soften up. But anyway, there's a lot of lentil seeds along the bike trail as you head south from Glenwood Park. And here's the red buds. So haven't quite opened up yet. This is one of my favorite colors in spring, though, when these flowers open up. My grandfather downstate, he had a lot of red buds lining the back of his yard, and I remember he brought one up for my mom and planted it in our backyard, and it grew. It died after about 40 years. It would just every spring pop out with these gorgeous, really deeply hued pinkish blossoms. So this is a pond. Now we've gone a little farther south on the bike trail. This is at Lippold Park. This is a pond. Now when I used to work down here, I worked at Red Oak Nature Center. We had Red Oak and then Lippold Park. They had joined along the bike trail there. When I worked at Red Oak, Lippold was an outdoor archery range, and this pond was much smaller. It really wasn't, the intent wasn't really to create a pond on this property. At that time, it was the borrow pit. It was where they dug up a lot of soil to create the mounds that the archery club would use for their outdoor targets. But then maybe, 10 years ago or so, the Fox Valley Park District, I believe this was a grant project, they enlarged the pond and they put in a boardwalk. And now it is toad central. Let's take a listen here to these toads. A lot of busy boys in the pond. So the male toads are the ones that do the singing. They're doing that to attract the females. I think the females make their, all right, we're going to move on because the boys will sing all night. They make their choices based on the sound qualities of the, oh boy, let's go on. I thought that was a photo. Sorry. these boys were busy too. There's a red-winged blackbird there, but the females, female toads will listen to the calls of the males, and they will make their choices based on what they hear. So lots and lots of toads calling. It's just warm enough. Oh, it wasn't quite quick enough to capture. There was a pair of blue-winged teal on the pond, but I spooked them, and off they went. So sorry for the bad nature photography there. Let's go on to something that holds nice and still, like these flowers here. Does anybody recognize the ladder-like quality of these leaves? It's a Jacob's ladder. The great thing about this stretch of bike trail, it was lined with wildflowers. We go from one species to another. Now, Jacob's ladder does get a nice purple blossom. You can see they haven't quite opened yet. Here's the bloom, the buds down here. But several nice clumps of Jacob's ladder right along the bike trail. Then we made it down. We walked past the nature center, and we went down to the rookery. That look at the size of this. It has expanded quite a bit since last year. I want to say last year there was maybe a dozen nests of maybe a little bit more than that, but it was white egrets, and it was great egrets, and it was great blue herons. This year you can see there's still the large nests of those tall wading birds, the herons and the egrets, but then there's a lot of smaller nests here too, because the double-crested cormorants have decided to move in as well. So there goes one flying away there. You can see there's some egret activity down here. The rookery has gotten quite a bit larger. Here comes a bird. I thought I had some cormorants that were flying in. There's a cormorant flying away. This was pretty cool to watch. I love watching giant birds land on tiny branches. Well, then we happened to notice that there was a little something else by the bike trail. I probably should have stopped this and said, this is for sensitive viewers might want to look the other way. This is an egret that didn't make it. I don't know what happened. We are going to talk about bird flu in a little bit. I can't say that this was a bird flu victim. In fact, I kind of wonder if maybe an eagle grabbed it, because it was on the other side of a chain link fence, a place an egret probably wouldn't go by itself, and a place that a coyote or another mammal predator would have a really hard time dragging the egret into. But a bird, a large predator like an eagle, could easily drop this on the other side of the fence. Anyway, I wanted to show you what happens when something dies. These beetles that we're looking at here, these beetles with the reddish, it's called the pronotum. It's kind of like a shield above their head. The margined carrion beetles here are going to town. Carrion beetles and flies are both decomposers, but they're kind of in competition with one another. So the carrion beetles have to come up with different ways of competing with the flies. Flies will lay tons and tons of eggs, and they'll produce tons and tons of maggots, which will compete. The maggots, or the fly larvae, will compete with the larvae of the beetles. So the margined carrion beetles, they will actually feed. The adults will feed on those fly larvae themselves. We've got some other types of carrion beetles in this area that are often they have mites on their shells that they bring to the carrion party. Those mites hop off and they eat the fly larvae for the carrion beetles. So there's lots and lots of different levels of drama going on right here, as you can see. Maybe you've heard about forensic entomology, where entomologists are called into crime scenes to look at what's living on the remains of a person, and they can make some judgments on when that person actually died based on the decomposers that have moved in. All right, so let's leave this be. We'll leave the dead stuff alone. We'll leave the rookery alone because I wanted to show you this. This is, I believe this is blue cohosh, and if there are some, and I know there are, some wildflower aficionados in the group, if you want to jump in with a different ID for that, if it's black cohosh, that's fine too, but blue cohosh is what I thought it was based on the bluish cast to the stem. Again, right next to the bike trail. This is a pretty rare plant in this area, and it was growing right next to some garlic mustard, which unfortunately is not a rare plant in this area. Some Dutchman's breeches, a really nice group there, named for the resemblance that they have to the apparently Dutchman's underpants. There's some more looks there. Red oak also has an area where the cousin of this plant that's called Squirrel Corn. The bloom is a little bit different. It's more oval. It looks vaguely like the kernel of an ear of sweet corn. Just a single kernel. It's same colors, white and yellow like this, but a different shape. Goes by the name of Squirrel Corn. And then of course we have our bluebells. Bluebells are kind of cool because when they first come up, before those buds open up, they often have a pinkish cast to them like this, but then as the flower matures and they open up into their bell shape, they turn blue. So nice stand of bluebells along one of the creeks on the northern edge of Red Oak's property. Not sure, this might have been a case of me taking a picture for no apparent reason. Violets. I have these in my yard. I look forward to seeing them every year. They are a native species, and they do host a fair number of caterpillars, fritillaries, fritillary butterflies like to lay their eggs on the leaves of violets. But violets aren't always violet colored. There's a huge patch of whitish violets as we headed back north towards Batavia. I think this starts to wrap things up here. Some geese. Oh, wait, I know what this was. We wanted to listen. Okay, so we've got the Spring's Here. Spring's Here. It's the song of the Phoebe. I thought I had got a recording here of a white-throated sparrow. Poor Sam Peabody, 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 or oh, sweet Canada, 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 but I must have missed it. Just took this to make a note to myself to talk to the new owners of the old VFW property to do something about their large amounts of turf grass and the goose haven that they've created there. And then I wanted to, and I don't know if I can zoom in on this. I just took this morning. So Wildflower Walk is over, and we're going to, in just a second, we've got a couple other things we're going to stop the screen share and talk about. But I took this photo, this one, and then this one too. Seeing this a lot lately. This is actually not in Batavia or along the bike trail. This is on one of the paths at Hickory Knolls, where we are seeing a lot of flickers. We've done some burning of some of our prairie areas, and it's exposed some large ant hills. Flickers will eat ants above pretty much anything else if they can find them on downed logs or and these ant mounds that we have out in the prairie. Well, this is a flicker. This is a flicker dropping. It is broken open, but if you look really closely at it, so we've got the white shell on the outside. That's the urates coating the fecal material that's inside. But this is all ant parts, little ant antennae and little ant legs and ant exoskeletons. It's kind of shiny. Of course, when I took this picture, the sun wasn't out. I was trying to capture how the insect parts will reflect the sunlight back at you. But if you see a fairly large dropping, I was really off on my game. I didn't put my lip balm down next to this, but this was about the size of a nickel, I would say. It wasn't huge, but flickers and flicker droppings are everywhere that the ants are these days. So, all right, with that, let's stop this share. And go back to this. And I know we had some chats here, so let's get to that before we move on. So you guys could hear Jimmy purring, huh? Yeah, he's quite the purr. He's quite the shedder right now, too. So Susie says that Fabian, across the street from the windmill, there's a huge amount of... Yes, that's another great spot for spring beauties at Fabian, on the, they call it Fabian East, I believe, over off of Route 25. Susie and Sarah, thanks for that. And then Kim's commenting, I believe, on the jewelweed, that it grows with the stinging nettle at Johnson's Mound. Jewelweed and stinging nettles. Stinging nettles, it's a chemical reaction. It's not an allergic reaction. If you get into this plant, it actually is, people say it's very nutritious. You can cook it like spinach, but it does. It's got, I believe, there's an acid in the leaves, and it's got little hairs that get into your skin, and it does produce a burning sensation. But jewelweed does a nice job of taking care of that. Okay, so Diane says that it would relieve the itch of the poisoning, but not prevent the reaction. Yeah, well, so I heard that too, Diane. But I never found that it gave me any relief at all. I just I never had poison ivy till I was in my 40s, and I just get these big, awful blisters, and it itched some, but to me it was really just really painful.
I've used it on mosquito bites, and I've found it helps a little bit.
It does help? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe
so I've never tried it on the itch from poison ivy. I haven't really had that many encounters with poison ivy, so
you're lucky.
Fortunately. But it does help with mosquito bites. So
oh, great. Well, and it's funny you say that, because I was out today. We had a lot of kindergartners out at Hickory Knolls today, and so I was out and a couple times I went off the trail. I was in the tall stuff, so I just keep thinking that I have things crawling on me still, ticks and things. I'm actually feeling kind of itchy right now. Thank you, Bob. Bird's Nest Fungi. Appreciate that ID on the cute little fungus that was growing by the moss. Never used to see cormorants until the last 5 years or so. So cormorants, they were at one time endangered here in Illinois. I think when I worked at Red Oak, we used to call them the birds that saved Red Oak, because there was a movement, I believe it was in the 1980s, to put a bridge across the property that is the Red Oak Park area down by where, if you're familiar with that area, where Devil's Cave is. And some studies were done. In addition to the engineering drawings, they were looking at what was living in the area, and there were cormorants nesting on those islands at that time. And because of their endangered status, that and other things, the bridge project was canceled. But there's, if you want to delve into, and I apologize, I don't have the names handy here. Cormorants are a bird with a lot of controversy. They are blamed in a lot of parts of the country for ruining the fishing of a lake. I remember reading a news article within just the last couple of years of a shooting match. Can't remember if it was North Carolina or South Carolina, but there was a lake there that had a very large population of cormorants. And so just like in the days when we had passenger pigeons and there would be contests to see how many passenger pigeons could be shot in a given length of time, they did that with cormorants. There's been books written about this sort of love-hate relationship that people have with cormorants. They are a fish-eating bird, so it kind of makes sense that as our waters have gotten cleaned up from things like DDT, plus just the general bad pollution we had in the 60s, that as the fish came back, the birds came back. But yeah, there's if you do some research on your own, you'll find there's all sorts of people who just really can't stand cormorants. I think they're kind of cool. I remember I wrote about them a few years ago. They remind me, when I see them, the song from the old TV show, The Addams Family, comes to mind. You know, they're creepy and they're kooky and they're all together ooky. I think they have a lot of nice qualities to them, but I can see how people would think that they're kind of creepy. Their dark feathers and the way they kind of spread their wings to dry out. They don't have the oils to keep their feathers dry when they dive for fish, so they have to dry themselves out. It helps them sink so that they can stay underwater. They're less buoyant because their feathers do get wet, but then when they come back up again, they have to spread out and dry out. And because they're black, people think they look, a little scary. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. They have definitely recovered here. Now, cormorants were the species that was mentioned in the articles detailing all the birds that died up in Barrington. And they are a bird that I guess is highly susceptible to that avian flu, which, yes, we're going to talk about. Let me just get through these next couple of chats here. Yes, stinging nettle does have a lot of calcium. I hear it's supposed to be really, really good for you. All right, so bird flu, and yes, the ticks are out at Hickory Knolls. When are the ticks not out at Hickory Knolls, right, Bob? I have seen so many ticks there, and you can bet I'm going to do a tick check when I get my PJs on tonight. So, one more thing before we get to bird flu. I did want to do one more screen share here because I realized last week we had, or a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned red-winged blackbirds, and a few of you then said to me afterwards, I didn't know the females looked different. Well, this is one. This was a female red-winged blackbird that was at the bird feeders at Hickory Knolls. And this picture is probably 10 years old. This is one of the female red-winged blackbirds of the pairs that nest around Hickory Knolls. This one, just like the males are pretty famous for dive bombing people when they're protecting their territory, she has learned to do that too. So she fiercely defends her territory. I think it's the same bird. It's the only time I've been chased by a female redwing, and they nest in the front of the property near the nature center, and the two of them kind of work in tandem, and will chase after humans walking by. Now, and John, we have to thank you for this one. Here's a female redwing out for a stroll. So they are the same size as the male red-winged blackbirds, but they have much, much different coloration. Red-winged nests tend to be fairly low, so I think it really behooves them to have that brownish and not very obvious sort of plumage. So I just wanted to clarify that for those of you who are asking what female redwings look like. Notice that the swifts are still on the river today. Aren't they migratory? Swifts or swallows? I think there's some swifts that are back. The swallows are still moving through, but we do have a lot that stay in the area. That answers your question, Meg?
Thank you.
I just was curious. I couldn't find any information on it, so.
Okay, yeah. So we've got there are swallows that push through here, and there are swifts that push through here to go to Wisconsin and Michigan and up into Canada. But then we also have some that are here all summer
Okay.
too and do their breeding here.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So bird flu. We have been hearing an awful lot about it, and IDNR issued a statement the other day recommending that everybody takes down their bird feeders and their bird baths till the end of May. I think they're thinking at that point that migration is going to be over with, and or winding down. People, the birds are going to be getting down to their business of breeding, and there's going to be less chance of this flu getting moved around the country. I think what's at the essence of that recommendation is that when you have an opportunity, when you create an opportunity for birds to congregate, you're also going to create an opportunity for birds to share germs. Now, there's a lot of sources out there. In fact, even Cornell has come out and said that songbirds are not known to be transmitting bird flu. But I just read on the Illinois Birding Network on their Facebook page, a woman said that. See, this is the danger of social media. So, it's social media, it's Facebook, it's a woman who's talking about her sister who had 20 dead birds around her feeder. Now, is it even a legitimate source? What I'm here to say is I don't ever put out bird feeders. I find it too hard to stay up on the cleaning of them, to scrub them out every week or two. I just don't have that kind of time. I also don't want to attract a lot of non-bird things to my yard. There's enough of those already. So, the rodents, the things that eat the rodents, like shrews. So I don't have any feeders to take down. I do, though, I often talk about my elderberries. I'm a big fan of planting plants that serve the same purpose as feeders. So you're planting shrubs, you're planting wildflowers that produce seeds and produce berries, and those feed the birds, but the birds don't congregate in the same fashion as they do around a bird feeder. So actually thinking about writing a column on that topic, but I wanted to see if any other organizations were going to beat me to it. But I think to play it safe, taking the feeders down, birds, bird feeders, I think the greatest purpose they serve is our entertainment. I think most birds are perfectly capable of finding things to eat. We are now into the season where a lot of birds, even seed-eating birds, are shifting their diets to get into their breeding modes. They're eating a lot more insects. If we could place an emphasis on making sure our yards are chemical free or reduced chemicals, so that we can promote the growth of insects, the health of our local insects. I think that's going to help our birds too. I also, and I'm kind of torn on this. So here's my bird feeder. I'm sorry, my bird bath. And it's a deck mounted heated bird bath. I took it down Easter weekend because I was going to be gone for a few days, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep it clean. That was right after those dead birds in Barrington were discovered. I haven't put it back up yet. I thought if I was going to be home enough to bleach it every day, I might feel okay about putting it out. But I haven't put it out yet. I feel a little bad. There's a cavity in the old box elder tree at the back of my yard, and there are chickadees nesting in there, and I kind of wonder if they were there last year too. I kind of wonder if they picked that because there's water close by. They've come to the deck rail several times and kind of turn their little chickadee heads around, wondering, well, where's our pond, where's our pool? But I just think it's only till the end of May. It's just another month that the advisory is going for. I think the safe thing to do is to not create opportunities for birds to congregate. One other thing I'll throw out there, it's unknown what happened to the mama great horned owl at Fabian Forest Preserve, but she did pass away over the weekend, or maybe it was just yesterday. Unknown causes. Her remains are at the vet right now, and they're going to do necropsy to see what she died from. But birds of prey have been listed as a group of birds that are susceptible to the flu. So, yeah. So Kim, I see your comment. We're at Wild Birds. So Wild Birds Unlimited, they sell bird seed. So, and I know they shared Cornell's statement that songbirds are not susceptible to this flu. I'd say, use your best judgment. I'm gonna pull my stuff in just to be safe, but it's funny. We're asking ourselves the same questions, the same questions we asked of ourselves as we were dealing with the COVID pandemic. Now we're asking about the birds as well, and I think erring on the side of caution. I don't think there's any harm in that. I don't think we're going to do the birds any disservice by pulling in feeders. Again, most feeders are there for our human pleasure. Birds got along just fine without them for a long time. So it is just another month. So that's what my stance is, to just don't put it out there. Wait and see what develops next.
Pam, the best article that I read about this avian flu was an article issued by the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota.
Okay.
And by the director. And what she said was that, and I was trying to find the link while I was sitting here, but I couldn't find it fast enough. But she said that they don't, that the truth is that scientists don't really know how songbirds are involved, or if they're involved at all in spreading the disease.
Oh.
So that was why they were taking the stance that you should take down your feeders.
Because they don't know the role. Yeah, well, that makes sense too, the unknown part of it, and that is so often the case with these outbreaks. That makes sense to me. And it is, it's a shame that this flu is coming at such a time when so many birds are moving around, that they could be exposed to something in, say, Tennessee, and then, they come north, they go through Indiana, they go through Illinois, they go to Wisconsin, they go into Minnesota, and they could be shedding virus all along the way. So anyway, yeah, it's certainly something to be concerned about, and I think the safer thing to do is to just not feed or have water out for the next month, and then I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it along the way, and we'll be able to find out what the next step is going to be. All right, speaking of birds and things that have befallen them, Bill and Kathy, I found this on my desk. At first, when I walked into the office, I saw this and I thought, ooh, is this lunch? Did somebody bring me a sandwich? And then I see for Pam Otto, contains a fragile feather ball. And Kathy and Bill wrote that this is the feather ball we found in our yard. What is it and what made it? Let me show you. So here we have a ball of feathers. And it looks, it almost looks like, it fell off a hat or something. You should see Jimmy's eyes. Jimmy's like, are you kidding me? It's Christmas. So Bill and Kathy found this ball, I guess, blowing across the yard. Uh-oh. We may never see it again. Jimmy, come here. Oh, no. Okay, so this looks like waterfowl feathers. I'm thinking maybe the breast of a goose, a Canada goose, And there is, I looked at this, so the down, so here's the outer feathers. And then under here is the white fluffy down. And if you part the down, you can see there is a little bit of bone and there's a little bit of flesh and a little bit of blood. So I think something bad happened to this bird, which I believe is a goose. It is nesting season. And we talked about it being mink season and how mink can't resist the allure of waterfowl eggs. I can't say for sure if this was the work of a mink that went after a nesting bird, or if it was something else. But I believe this bird is no longer, if it is still alive, it's got a big missing patch of feathers on its breast. But these are all, would have all been laying, let me see if I can make it lay flat again. Laying flat on the breast of the bird as it was sitting on its eggs. So yeah, something happened. And again, the gray, it reminds me of the breast of a Canada goose. Jimmy's going to be all over this. So that, I hope that answers your question, Bill and Kathy. This it's a neat little thing. I would be glad to give it back to you, or I'd be glad to add it to the collection of curiosities we have here at Casa Auto. Jimmy actually will take it over too.
You can add it to your collection.
All right, thanks, Bill. That I will. I have to put it up high though, so yeah, the king of destruction here. Oh, there it goes. Hold on. We'll put it up high. I can't reach it. All right, let's see. We got a couple other questions here. Is bleach bad for the environment? I'm torn about using it. Okay, so Jerry, I believe the recommended application is 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. So it's fairly dilute. And then, if I remember correctly, when you're disinfecting something with bleach, you let it air dry, and that air drying completes the disinfection and sanitizing part of the process, and it also helps the chlorine to evaporate. So I don't think at the levels that we're talking it's going to cause a whole lot of damage, and I think it will kill a lot of things that are harmful, like viruses.
Okay, that's good to know. I was using dish soap because I don't have any bleach.
Well, there I think then you use more agitation to scrub and get rid of the germs. Oh, I had a thought and I lost it. Bleach, letting it dry. So yeah, rather than using a toweling it dry to let them air dry, I think that is the key to achieving the disinfection part of that. Oh, I know what it was. If you do choose to keep your feeders out, that's your choice, and I'm not going to make any judgments either way. But I would suggest that you clean your feeders more often. We talked about doing it once a week. I know the general recommendation is once every 2 weeks, but if you're getting a lot of traffic, once a week, I would step it up to maybe every other day or so. Now we are going to be seeing our orioles and our hummingbirds showing up. I know some people do have hummingbird feeders out. That one, hummingbird feeders, you don't get a big crowd of hummingbirds at the feeder. It's not like a big hopper style feeder or a big platform feeder where you might have 10 or 12 birds gathered around it. And plus hummingbird liquid, it spoils very easily, so cleaning it every day, you might be okay. Again, I'm not doing any of this, but I can see making an argument for putting a hummingbird feeder out. Because that is something that with the cold temperatures, if our flowers are closed up, if their insects aren't flying, those birds I could see needing a little extra pump of food. But again, I'm not going to do it. Same with grape jelly. It goes bad quickly. It gets ants in it. If you're changing it rapidly, if you just have it out for a very short period of time, it might be okay. But again, you want to avoid a situation where birds are allowed to congregate. With that, does anybody have anything else for us? Jimmy's looking up at me now like, all right, we've had our playtime. I want the fluffy ball to play with. If not, folks, I really appreciate you tuning in tonight. I hope for continued warming trends in our springtime weather. Next week we'll be looking at a little bird called a killdeer and what it's up to these days. Everybody, have a great rest of your evening. Have a great rest of your week. See if you can find yourself some good nature.
Thank you, Pam.
Everybody.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Pam.
Thanks, Pam.
You're the best.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks,
Pam.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Pam.
Ah.